So you want to become a wood carver. What does it take? Well, the simplest form of wood carving is something we call whittling. All it requires is just a simple knife, a piece of wood, a place to carve, and it sort of brings back visions of people sitting on a back porch somewhere, carving things like ball in the cage or a wooden chain, or all sorts of small little animals. In fact, once you take your knife and once you get started with whittling, this might be as far as you want to go with wood carving. Very easy to get into, inexpensive hobby. You know, for like a $20 knife, you're all set if you want to for carving for life. But then some people want to go just a little bit further because you are kind of limited what you can do with a knife. So for a lot of the projects we find, in addition to having sort of like a $15 to $20 knife, oh, by the way, you could use a pocket knife, but we sort of avoid pocket knives for the simple reason they fold closed. And when you're carving, that's the last thing you want to have is you don't want your blade closing down onto your fingers. So your first thing you need is some sort of a carving knife. The second thing you'll notice on the hand that's holding the piece of wood, that's the one that if you slip, you're going to cut yourself. So a $15 carving glove, these are made out of a material like Kevlar. So if you do happen to slip, it sort of protects you, gives you sort of that second chance. They're not perfect, but it's a lot easier than a trip to the emergency room. So a knife, a carving glove, it pretty much gets you started with whittling. In order to get into wood carving, you usually add a few more extra tools, one of which, like say you were carving a spoon and you wanted to scoop out the inside of the spoon, it's going to be easier to do if you have a tool called a gouge. You can see it has sort of a curved shape, so if you're trying to get the inside of where the spoon would be, you can see you can work in this direction, scooping it out, where if you tried to do that with a knife, the knife works good on the outside shape, but not so good when you get to the inside. Another tool that comes in handy is kind of like a V-tool. It's almost like two knives put together, and like with all of these, whatever the shape of the tool is, that's the shape of the cut that it's going to do. So sort of with the knife, a gouge, and possibly a V-tool, you're set for all kinds of different types of wood carving. Another thing that comes in handy is we usually start with a cutout. So if you take the piece of wood, you could start and just take away everything that doesn't look like a bunny. But if you were to take a bandsaw or a jigsaw or somebody with a coping saw and you cut the basic shape out, it's going to save you a lot of time. It also sort of helps you visualize what is this project going to look like. So with the cutout, it then becomes sort of a step-by-step process where you start with the cutout. You sort of start carving the shape of it until you end up with a three-dimensional shape, and then you can see now it's time to round the shell, take care of the feet, take care of the head, and you've got yourself a turtle. So that helps, but how do you actually use all these tools? The first thing, let's start with a knife. The easiest type of cut, we've got the safety glove, we've got our knife, of course we need to have a razor sharp knife, is what's called a slicing cut. But this one can get you in trouble, because a slicing cut, when you start going like this, taking off a lot of material, well, safety-wise, you always want to make sure of where is the knife and where's the knife going. And when the knife goes out here, that could be a problem. Somebody could be over there, it could fall out of your hand. So another option instead of with the slicing cut is something we call a push cut. A lot more control. Instead of just pushing it through, we're going to use the right hand holding the knife to sort of angle it, and we're going to use the thumb of the hand that's holding the wood, and we're going to push it in. So it's sort of like a two-handed process, and you can see by doing it this way, it's a little hard to sort of get used to it, but now you're in a lot more control, and you don't have to worry about the knife sort of flying away from you. So between the slicing cut and the push cut, that works good for sort of rounding the shape that you want. But what about when you want to work into the corners? You know, we don't want to just go along, we want to go in. Well, this gets to be a little bit of a problem because wood, well, think of it as sort of like if this were an axe. Could I just cut straight in? It's not going to work too well. So if you've used an axe before, you know that because of the fibers of the wood, we have to cut in at an angle. That would be your first cut. Then you cut in at an angle from the other side, and hopefully they meet in the middle, and your chip comes out. If you want it deeper, okay, just like with an axe again, we can make it deeper. So this is what we call a V-cut. And again, think of it as just sort of like chopping a tree down with an axe. But what if we want to go and we don't want a V at the end? We have a thing called a stop cut, which again, it's a little harder. We're going to cut in this direction straight, and then as we cut, you see how it stops? when I get to where that cut is. I can go a little deeper, stops. Cut a little deeper, stop. So now I've got sort of the slicing cut, I've got the V cut, I've got the stop cut, and I'm well on my way to being able to take whatever shape I've got and watching the grain in the wood start working through all these different pieces. And if you look at it, you can sort of see a combination of all these different cuts that I've talked about as you start to work through your project. One other thing that we should talk about is how about when you want to cut inside of something? If you just are using a knife and you want to get inside, we use another cut, probably easier if we set this on the table. And if we just take the knife, hold it at an angle, and sort of cut in this direction, then hold it at an angle the other side, cut in this direction, might have to do it a few times. You can see that eventually we've now popped out sort of a triangular piece on the inside. The V-tool I talked about earlier, that sort of helps a lot because you see with the V-tool, you do the same thing, only you get it all in sort of one movement of the tool. So sort of between those cuts, you're just going to take whatever project you've got and start taking a blank, start taking wood away from it until you end up with your finished product. Okay, and again, whittling, getting started with wood carving, doesn't take a whole lot of materials. Really, you're just talking about a knife, a glove, and maybe a gouge and a V-tool, and you're all set for, what, $50? You've got a set of tools that you can use for the rest of your life. Of course, if you get more involved, then you start adding more tools and more tools to it. But that's what it takes to become a wood carver.